Mr. Mayor, it's 6:30. We have all members present with the exception of Councillor Grace, who is absent tonight. Councillor Dave Mayette will be joining us a little later. We have a quorum and you may begin.
All right, thank you, Linda. I'd like to call to order this planning meeting of the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores and welcome all members of the committee and welcome everyone who's watching us on the live stream this evening. We're glad that you're with us. The second item on the agenda is additions, deletions, amendments. We don't have any of those. Third item is disclosures of pecuniary interest. Ask any member if you have a pecuniary interest you'd like to declare at this time. Seeing none, of course, you can do that anytime if you need to. There are no minutes to adopt this evening, so that moves us on to public meetings. We have 3 public meetings on the agenda this evening, and I'll just run down how those are going to go for folks who are watching. We will begin each of the public meetings with a presentation from our planner, following which we will open the public meeting and begin by hearing from the applicant or their representative. After that, we'll hear from members of the public who want to speak to council on the public meeting. And after that, we'll open the floor to members of council who will ask any questions for clarification that they may have, and that will bring the public meetings to an end at that point. And at each public meeting, I'll make sure to ask the planner to let the public know how they can be kept informed on these applications as they make their way through the planning process. Of course, council will not be making decisions on any of these items that are before us in public meetings this evening. That will happen at a later date. So the first public meeting this evening, 5.1, is L-2022-002 and Z-2022-026, Town of Saugeen Shores, additional residential units. And we'll turn it over. I see Monica there, our senior planner, so we'll turn it over to her for the presentation.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Mayor Charbonneau. Good evening to members of the committee that are in attendance tonight. It's my pleasure to present this application for local official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment. Since joining the County Planning Department in September, this is my first opportunity to present at the Town of Saugeen Shores, so it's a pleasure to be with you here tonight. As the mayor mentioned, this is a public meeting. The purpose of a public meeting is to receive comments from the public and to discuss the matters at hand for an official plan amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment. Purpose of the proposed amendments are to permit additional residential units in accordance with local and provincial planning direction. The amendments will apply across the Town of Saugeen Shores. An example of an additional residential unit would be a secondary unit within a house, so a basement apartment, a garage apartment, etc. Or an additional residential unit could be a detached unit. They're sometimes known as granny flats or laneway homes. The amendments have a number of components, but overall the intent of the amendments are to enable the community to establish additional residential units for the purpose of promoting affordable housing. So without getting into a lot of detail, I'll just summarize the amendment. The amendment will permit additional residential units on all legally conforming properties that have one detached house, a semi-detached house, or a townhouse, subject to certain conditions for agricultural areas and properties not connected to municipal services. Up to 3 additional residential units will be permitted per property, including up to 2 within the main house and up to 2 detached from the main house for a total of 3. There will be zoning bylaw amendments within the zoning bylaw and amendments within the town's official plan. And these are in alignment with language in the Planning Act and the county's official plan. An associated amendment was made to the Bruce County official plan, which has been recommended by the Planning and Development Committee and will be passed by council. It's our expectation that it will be passed by council. So if the proposed amendments to the official plan and zoning bylaw are passed, then they will come into effect as of the time of coming into effect of Bruce County official plan. So as the mayor alluded, it is not the practice of the town to adopt those amendments at this meeting necessarily, but at a future meeting when those are adopted and following the appeal period. And once the county's official plan comes into force, then these changes, if adopted as recommended, could come into force at that time. When circulating this application, there were no objections from agencies or neighbors. There were very few agency comments. However, comments were received from the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, and they have no objection. So in view of the benefit of being able to promote more affordable housing within the town, it is the planning department's recommendation that official plan amendment number L2 for 2022 and zoning bylaw amendment Z26 for 2022 be adopted, and the zoning bylaw be amended, and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. Mr. Mayor, those will be my comments for the time being. If there are any questions, I'm available. And if members of the public have any questions or would wish more information about the proposed applications, they can contact the Bruce County Planning and Development Department.
Thank you, Monica. And just so I'm clear, and I made an error in my initial statements around this one. At least there is a recommendation on this one to adopt the official plan amendment and approve the zoning bylaw amendment and forward them to council for adoption. So indeed, there is a recommendation this evening from planning staff for council to make a decision on this one planning application and public meeting. So just wanted to clarify that. That was my error off the top. So with that, we will open the public meeting, and I guess, are there comments from the town of Saugeen Shores from the applicant? Jay, do you have any comments that you want to make before we take the public comments?
Apologize, learning technology is tough for myself. So I don't have any additional statement. I do want to just identify that Sibriel Wong, our housing coordinator, is also available to answer questions or address any comments that council may have.
Okay, good enough. Thank you, Jay. So we will now open the floor to the members of the public who wish to speak to us this evening. I have two on my list, so we'll hear from them. The first is Jerry Moss. And do we have Jerry?
Mr. Mayor, I think we're going to have to call upon if it's Jennifer Soper. We've been trying to admit Jennifer, thinking it might be Jerry there, but if you wanted to move on to Dane Butner,
I see.
We can come back to Jerry Moss.
Okay, I see Dane's name there. So Dane, I see you on the list as well. So do you want to speak to us, Dane?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I just had some questions in regards to, is there like a set of like square footage, like footprint size, height restrictions, setbacks, that kind of stuff, I guess, to go along with the amendment?
So Dane, why don't you, do you have more questions than that, or is that your only question?
It's, and then just, yeah, it's basically just for square footage, footprint size, setbacks, zoning, and then just if unable to tie into current, like the sanitary sewer, like if a septic or a holding tank is able to be permitted to kind of accommodate in certain areas in town.
All right, well, we'll get those two questions answered here. Dane, maybe Monica, can you address those questions?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. And Sibriel Wong may wish to add to my comments since she's very up on this as well.
Sure.
The town has created a guide to help residents learn about additional residential units and some of the best practices involved in creating those units. Illustrations, design options, etc., including minimum and maximum floor areas are provided. And that's in the planning department's guide to additional residential units. There's also a building department guide to additional residential units. So for questions such as setbacks, floor area, the guides that are prepared by the town staff are a great resource for that. When it comes to things like setbacks, that will also be set out in zoning bylaw. When it comes to connection to municipal water and sewer services, Where municipal services are available, and it would be recommended to connect to those municipal services and overcome any obstacles to connecting to the sanitary. However, there are some places within the county that I'm familiar with, and perhaps in Saugeen Shores as well, where municipal services are not available. And in those cases, additional residential units can be permitted with a septic system, provided that minimum lot area requirements are met.
Okay.
Is there anything else, Dane?
The only other thing was just about parking, about a potential consideration for like maybe permitting wider driveways, or if that would have to be a permit requirement. Just if you have a residential neighborhood where you're able to put, say you have a duplex and you want to put a unit out back, it'd just be you only have 24 feet right now, so it'd just be being able to kind of get a permit where you could get to 30 feet to allow for 3 vehicles, so you're not playing like you're not struggling cars, and your tenants are able to have 3 adequate parking spaces. It's kind of my only thought about some consideration for that.
Monica?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, the town of Saugeen Shores staff were very sensitive to that issue of driveways, and that is one of the reasons that further amendments were proposed to the Bruce County official plan to add some more flexibility at the local level to address driveways. So provided that driveways can meet the requirements of the road approval authority and meet with all the safety requirements, then there could be an opportunity for additional driveways or widening of driveways in order to accommodate. But that would be according to the standards set out in the town for driveway approvals.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Sabriel, I saw you come online there. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Hi, yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, and also thank you, Monica. I just wanted to point out for the servicing part that Dave mentioned, the requirements are that sites that are not connected to the municipal services can be permitted to have an ARU under the condition that it won't affect the groundwater quality. So it may need a nitrate study to back it up. And that will be, the nitrate study will be according to the county's bylaw on that section, which that part will be listed in the guide provided by the planning department, and it will be available online after the session.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dane, for your questions. Do we get, Linda, did we get Mr. Moss?
You can call upon Jennifer Soper to turn on, to unmute yourself.
Hi.
Hi there.
Hi, Jennifer.
Sorry.
Yes, sorry, I am Steve Herzing's partner. I am just viewing with interest.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're here for 5.2.
Okay.
Very good. So we don't have Mr. Moss, then I take it, Linda?
No, we do not, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, well, if he happens to come in the next couple of minutes, let us know and we can always bring him in. But if that is, we don't have Mr. Moss and we don't have anyone else, am I right about that, Linda? Nobody, no other members of the public have asked to speak to council on this public meeting?
That is correct. There is no further speakers to this application.
Okay, thank you. So we will now open the floor then to members of council to hear any questions or comments that you may wish to make at this time. The deputy mayor and then the vice deputy mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, I agree with Mr. Butner about the parking. I'm noticing many units now that are coming on that are townhouses or houses split with 2 different occupancies, upper or lower, that the driveways are not big enough to service 4 vehicles or the size of the vehicles. By today's standards, whether you have a large vehicle or not, many driveways I'm seeing now have vehicles hanging out over the sidewalks. So I do believe we have to look at the parking lot, the driveway configuration a little closer. That way we're not blocking sidewalks. That's a major impact on people walking, and there's a lot of people out and about now. So I don't know how we go about that, but we do have to address driveways.
Any further comments to make on that point, Monica or Cibriel?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would say that the aim of the amendments that have been crafted by town staff and with cooperation from the county planning department are to offer the type of flexibility necessary to accommodate as much as possible additional residential units. Having said that, there may be some properties where it is not suitable because of restrictions like parking or safety issues. And in those cases, there may be some sites that aren't able to accommodate a detached additional residential units because of constraints around parking. So that's the balance that I think the town has done a good job in striking with this amendment. And as more of these developments come forward, the intent would be to use the guides that the town has created to try to work through those issues with citizens as best as possible to achieve the maximum benefit for the community.
Okay, the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I know this is a public meeting. It's no final decision tonight, but I just wanted to say this, that Cibriel and Monica and Jay, tremendous amount of work and has gone into this, a tremendous amount of work. Anytime you look at a 40, 50 page document, Mr. Mayor, we're talking about additional residential units. You know, it certainly excites me. You talk about laneway homes and granny flats and additional residential units on existing lots. There's a lot of good value in here. And I know we'll make comment at a later date on when we're getting to the approval stage. But I just want to throw that out there, Mr. Mayor, that there's been a tremendous amount of work.
Just to clarify, for the Vice Deputy Mayor and all members, there is a recommendation on this, and we will be voting on it this evening. So if you do have comments that you want to make, then by all means.
I do. Sorry, I missed. It's a public meeting, and sorry. And it deals with the additional units. I just want to verify with the agricultural area under 3.384 other, and it's on page 19. You know, a lot containing additional residential unit must front on a class 1 municipal street, but there is the notwithstanding clause, right, Monica, where it clarifies that yes, they are permitted in rural agricultural areas, and Cibriel, you alluded to nitrate study, but it is doable, because I've had a few people ask about this in our rural community. Can there be second residential units in rural areas? So just reconfirm that. I think I know the answer, but I see it in writing here, but that notwithstanding clause 3.318 covers it off, but they are permitted.
For you, Mr. Mayor, yes. The county's policies allow additional residential units anywhere that a home is permitted as a permitted use, which would include farms and rural properties in the countryside. And as long as that property has access to a public road, which could be a county highway or other public road, then the access issue that you referenced would be satisfied. So yes, to be clear, additional residential units are permitted in agricultural areas, and that is in addition to facilities that may be provided for farm work. An additional residential unit does not have to demonstrate it to be for farm workers. It can be additional housing in the countryside.
Thank you for that. And in the report, and if I've missed it, my apologies, but you know, when you talk about septic tanks, septic beds, you know, in the report, maybe you can direct me to it if I've missed it, but compostable toilets, you know, compostable. Are there there's different methods of, you know, they can't tie into municipal water and sewer, but they, you know, they put in a septic tank. Is this bylaw at all talk about that in terms of the different types of hookups to a septic tank, septic bed versus compostable toilets, those sorts of things? Is it in the report here anyway?
I don't recall providing detail about compostable toilets, but In my experience with these types of units, if the existing septic system on the property, if we're talking a rural property, is sized appropriately to accommodate tying into the existing system, then that's an option. A separate septic system for the additional residential unit is also an option, or anything that could satisfy the building code requirements is also an option.
Gotcha. So the building department will make that determination for second additional residential units. If the lot size is, then you talk about 0.4 hectares. If it's large enough, if it's, they may, let's rephrase that, they may be required to put in a separate septic system for the second unit. So that determination will be made by the building department?
Yes, through the mayor, that is exactly right. The concern in the county's policies is to meet provincial nitrate criteria to protect water quality from pollution. Right. And that's what your lot sizes and nitrate studies address. When it comes to specifically addressing services on site, whether that be tying into an existing system or installing a new system, and it would be the local building department that would need to be satisfied on that point.
I just want to close, Mr. Mayor. I think this report, this council's done a phenomenal, and yes, the recommendations right on the first page, of course. But this council's done a terrific job of trying to add additional, secondary dwelling suites, rental units, and anytime we look at laneway homes and granny flats, and I just think it's another. And we talked about this, the Attainable Housing Task Force, the importance of breaking down some of those barriers and allowing members of the public to take a look at those smaller tiny homes or granny flats or laneway homes. And so we're hitting a home run here, and in my view, to assist our housing situation in Saugeen Shores. And I certainly will be supporting the recommendation. I did read it, but I overlooked the fact that, in fact, we are making that decision tonight. But I just want to again thank staff for a wonderful job. There's a ton of work went into this, and anytime we can improve our situation to do with attainable housing, affordable housing, and this could have some of those components attached to it. The end result. So thanks again, Monica and Jay and Sibriel, for a great job.
Yeah, very good. Councilor Jakes and then Councilor Davinsky.
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, you're muted still, Minnie.
Oh, shoot. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Just wondering, when we're talking about homes and being moved on, I got a phone call when this was announced and put on the website regarding homes that had wheels as opposed to homes that had an actual foundation. The fear was of people just moving in an RV and having it in the backyard and renting it out. So I wondered if anything would be addressed as to, it would have to be a permanent home and would have to have a foundation. If I didn't see it included and I may have missed it.
Comments to that from Monica?
The details of what would be permitted are spelled out in the zoning bylaw, and homes that are movable are regarded differently under the building code and under the use provisions in the zoning bylaw. So the use, just to confirm, the uses that we're talking about would be either permanently attached to the home within the home as a second unit in the home, or a permanent detached unit. But mobile homes, park model trailers, or other tiny homes on a trailer would not be included in the definition of an additional residential unit.
Thank you for clarification. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Davinsky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to Monica, perhaps Sibriel. It's a great report. Thank you very much. And it's moving Saugeen Shores forward. However, in some cases, and I didn't see anything in the report, what about people turning these into Airbnbs? And is there some sort of rule that won't allow that sort of thing to happen? I'm just wondering.
Monica or Sibriel?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. It's an excellent question, and certainly the rise of services like Airbnb have really changed the landscape for affordable housing and rentals. And we've seen the impacts of that throughout not only Bruce County, but Ontario as a whole and beyond. And the key thing when addressing the issue of short-term rentals is how the zoning bylaw works with respect to uses. So the use of additional residential unit is defined in the zoning bylaw, and a short-term rental would not be included in that definition. And that the issue of short-term rentals is a challenge, but the town has proposed some other tools to use to address short-term rentals, which could be employed to help with the enforcement of ensuring that these units are used for permanent residential rather than short-term rentals.
Thank you. And also, I didn't see the recommendation, Mr. Mayor, and I'm just wondering what the timeline is for something like this. We seem to be moving forward, which is a great thing. And I'm just wondering what the timeline is.
Timeline for approval, is that what you mean, Councilor Vinsky?
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I want to know, like, we're going to approve the recommendation. Where does it go from there? How long does it have to come back? And how long will it take to be able to start allowing people to do exactly what is said in this report?
You'll note that the recommendation is that the committee adopt the amendments and forward them to, well, one to county council and one to our council for adoption. So there's another step in the approval process where it will go to, in the case of the zoning bylaw amendment, to Saugeen Shores Council, and in the case of the official plan amendment to Bruce County Council. Those councils will have to consider the amendments and approve them at a future meeting, whenever it can get on an agenda. And then maybe following that, Monica or Sabriel, can you make a comment about what implementation looks like at that point?
Yes, just for benefit of everyone, there is a potential that part of that timeline that the mayor has just outlined could be condensed. If this application for official plan amendment and the application for zoning bylaw amendment pass tonight's public meeting with no objections, since there have been no objections from agencies and the recommendation of the planning department is that it is in conformity with county policy and provincial policy. This is actually an approval that can be delegated to the director of the Bruce County Planning Department. So a nice thing maybe that you don't have to wait for another Planning and Development Committee meeting and council meeting to have the final final approval of an adopted official plan amendment. So that part is a little bit nice. In terms of some of the timelines that we're currently looking at, each of these amendments has a 20-day appeal period. So that 20-day appeal period will have to pass before they can be enforced. And the local official plan amendment will require that approval by the planning director. The approval by the planning director of the official plan amendment would be following Bruce County official plan amendment coming into force. So we're looking at 20 days plus, I would call it, I'll call the timeline before all of these various nested amendments fall into place. Following these policies coming into place, I would perhaps through the mayor suggest that Ms. Sabriel Wang might have some comments about how implementation will look at local level.
Do you have a comment, Linda, before we go to Sabriel? I see you come online there.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we now have Jerry Moss. He has joined the meeting and we promoted him to panelist. If he would like to join us and provide his comments to the application.
Sure. Well, why don't we just complete the thought on what we were just talking about, and then we'll bring Mr. Moss in. So Sabriel, it's always a good idea when the clerk comes on to recognize her and see what she has to say. So apologize for interrupting, but we'll go on to you, Sabriel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and no worries. And To respond to an earlier point from Councillor Davinsky, I think it was a great idea that this was brought up. I think Councillor Jack also brought this up, and it's a really good idea to include in our guide. So we'll make this an edit to include such as like the uses of ARUs, additional residential units, to provide more clarity for our public members to see how they can be used. Right now, as Monica said, that they are not permitted as short-term rentals simply because accessory structures are not permitted as short-term rentals, or anything that is used for profit, such as home businesses or rentals in general. For just secondary units, that restriction has not changed. It follows the previous restriction where currently we don't regulate it. However, we are considering to create a separate bylaw to look into short-term rentals that is not a part of the zoning bylaw, similar to how certain jurisdictions have done it, where they have a different registration system. So we'll look into that more further in the future. And then for implementation, Mr. Mayor, we've discussed the guidelines and the zoning bylaw specific amendments with our building department, and they will be the ones enforcing these actual bylaw clauses. And I have great confidence that they are doing a great job, and they will continue to do so.
If you just, sorry, just to follow up on that, just so I'm really clear. So you're saying that the bylaw currently, as written, prevents an additional dwelling unit from being used as a rental unit, a short-term rental unit, or for generating a profit, I think is how you put it. But you say but a secondary dwelling unit is not regulated in that way. Could you just maybe just run through that again? Because you have two different definitions there, and I thought we were eliminating those two separate definitions, so I'm just a little bit confused. Clarify.
So for this amendment, we did not touch on how accessory structures were separately regulated previously. Right. So this was a clause that carried over from just a regulation on accessory structures in general. Right. So this only applies, therefore it applies to the ones that are outside the house, like garden suites, tiny homes, so on.
And we don't regulate their use to be an Airbnb, for example.
We do. So we prohibit it. We prohibit it for those ones. And then for the ones in the house, which are secondary units as defined before, those are currently not looked at for profit or gain. So they are still able to be home businesses or rentals, so to say, as they are currently. So that is not limited. But we are looking into regulating short-term rentals specifically as a whole, regardless of where they are. So at the moment, they are not permitted as a accessory structure.
Okay. I think that we have combined up everything is now an additional dwelling unit. There's no such thing as a secondary suite and all these things, but some additional dwelling units, those that are inside the primary structure, can be used for rental purposes. Those that are in an accessory structure cannot.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. That's
Mr. Mayor, just one other question.
Yeah.
If we pass this recommendation tonight, does that 20-day appeal period, I guess this is through you to Monica, does that 20-day appeal period start tomorrow?
Monica?
Sorry about that. I was having trouble with my mute button. Through the mayor, the The 20-day appeal period actually starts from the date of the notice of public meeting being distributed, and that notice can sometimes take up to 15 days following decision to be circulated. So it would be 20 days would start following the date of the notice of decision, and that would be for the purpose of any appeals that may be offered to the local official plan amendments adoption or the zoning bylaw amendments approval. There's also a county official plan amendment. Don't anticipate any appeals to the county official plan amendment, and there's an appeal period on that one that will be starting 20 days after the notice of that goes out from council's decision. So yeah, we're kind of in we're approaching a period of time where there'll be approximately a month where we're waiting for various appeal periods to expire.
I think the point is there's a standard process playing out here. It will take a certain amount of time, but we will implement it with all deliberate speed, and hopefully that will be soon. But it always takes a matter of some weeks to move through to implementation of the official plan amendment, and that's going to be the case here as well. So we do have Mr. Moss online here, so I do want to bring him in. Can we bring him in? There he is. Are you there, Jerry?
There, can you hear my voice now?
We can hear you. We can't see you though.
Oh, that's just as well, maybe.
No, we need to see you.
Now can you? Yeah, you can see me now, or maybe.
Still a black screen, but that's all right. We can hear you at least, right? So.
All right. Well, I guess I'd like to applaud council on their forward thinking in terms of making some of these new sorts of residential buildings possible in our municipality. So that's fantastic. As we start to talk about the Airbnb and short-term rental and that sort of thing, it gets to be a little bit like a quagmire, and you can't ever anticipate all of the things that might happen with a bylaw like this, and how you might enforce a bylaw like this, and so on. So I'm just wondering if we're probably not the first municipality in Ontario to venture into this area. I wonder how much we've been able to learn from the early adopting areas that we might include at this point in time in our bylaw. And the other related comment would be, is there an automatic review period that allows you to make the kind of small adjustments that are likely going to be required in this kind of a new bylaw?
Sure. Well, we can put that Monica and Sabriel.
I'll start through you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly are other jurisdictions that are grappling with the question of short-term rentals. And this isn't just precipitated by additional residential units. In places where there's an attraction to amenities nearby, like the beauty of Lake Huron, which is certainly a factor in the town of Saugeen Shores, then these jurisdictions have already been dealing with how they manage short-term rentals. And that's why staff's idea to have a separate bylaw that specifically addresses short-term rentals is a good one. There is some power in the zoning bylaw, as I stated earlier, to make clear what uses are permitted and what uses are not permitted, and make that distinction between uses that are for-profit businesses. And as Ms. Wang has pointed out, there's already some controls that can immediately be enforced to address the attached accessory building from being used for that purpose. So yes, there is definitely some experience in areas such as Goderich, which is taking a more strict definition on short-term rentals, and I have family that lives there who have received letters from the town because they operate an Airbnb. So depending on the level of enforcement and approach, there could be a number of opportunities for the town of Saugeen Shores to use those other examples. But the bottom line is that there is power in the zoning bylaw to regulate this, and a separate bylaw would provide even further guidance.
Did you have any comment, Monica, about Mr. Moss's question about an opportunity to review the changes down the road to assess whether small amendments might be required?
I think that's always, it's part of the philosophy of planning, the theory of planning, that incremental changes. You plan, you test, evaluate, and you replan. So that is always an opportunity to make further amendments to either the zoning bylaw or the official plan. The intent of this amendment is to be comprehensive and not need those types of changes. And I think if there were further changes needed, they would likely be occurring, perhaps some small tweaks and changes to the zoning bylaw. But I think the way that the official plan policies are written, they should give the town the control that they need to regulate this development, but also the flexibility to do it in a way that works for the town.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Moss? Oh, you're muted there, Jerry.
There, I'm unmuted now. Thank you. I assume that that this will apply to all the residential zones, but you may have covered that, and I was into the meeting late. I'm out of town actually, and got tied up. Will this apply to all the different sorts of residential zones?
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it does apply to all places where a residence is permitted as a permitted use. However, depending on what zones you're in, the zoning bylaw provisions are tailored accordingly. So for areas that are not on municipal services, there's some different provisions in the zoning bylaw. For agricultural areas, there's other provisions. So it's tailored, it's permitted, but it's tailored according to the zones.
Thank you.
Okay, is that
that's the end of my questions.
Right.
Thanks for allowing me to take part.
Yeah, well, appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're back then. Are there further questions or comments from members of the committee? Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just I want to go back, Monica, to the 0.4 hectares on page 19. And it talks about this additional residential unit being permitted versus 0.8 hectares on page 20. And so I'm just not quite understanding that yet. 0.4 hectares, I think, is around 1 acre. 0.8 hectares, around 2 acres. I don't quite get that yet. Could you just explain again the difference between the 0.4 hectares and the 0.8 hectares on page 19 and 20?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Now, this may be a stumper for me, which I may go to Ms. Wang, but I think that the reference to 0.8 hectares or greater in agricultural areas is referencing agricultural areas, and that an additional residential unit is permitted in addition to any temporary residences for seasonal or part-time operations. So I can see in my copy of the report where the 0.8 hectares is referenced. Now, is there also a reference to?
Page 19, yeah. Page 19, okay. There's reference to 0.04. So I just wasn't understanding the two numbers.
So that's the, sorry, Mr. Mayor, the 0.04 is the one that I'm not familiar with. So I'm wondering if Ms. Wang can jump in and help me with that one.
Yes, for sure. Thank you, Monica, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the way that was set up was that the 0.4 hectares was more targeted towards the sites or lots that would be outside of agricultural zones, but not necessarily connected to municipal services. So because they're not necessarily farm properties, they could be smaller and still can have an additional additional residential unit without sort of impacts to the groundwater or the nitrate system that is already existing on the farm, for example.
Okay.
Whereas for farm or agricultural zones, whether it is a farm or not, generally there is more servicing requirement just in terms of the farm operations and the additional buildings that are in on a property, for example. If, for example, a farm has temporary buildings that are there to accommodate their farm help, seasonal farm help, then overall the lot should be bigger. So how to read this section would be that the agricultural clauses would be notwithstanding the entire section previously, and these are specifically tailored for the agricultural zone, whereas any clause in the section before, in the 3.38 section, for example, those sections are tailored for just properties in general. And then that page 19 clause, Mr. Vice Deputy Mayor, is specific for those properties that are not connected to municipal services, but are also not in agriculture zones.
Gotcha.
That makes sense.
No, I do get it. It's a 0.4 inside the serviced area, but not necessarily hooked up to water sewer in the municipal boundary internally with servicing, and the 0.8 is more in the agricultural area.
Yes.
So I understand now. I just saw the two numbers and I wasn't quite understanding why the 4 and the 8. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, very good. Are there further questions or comments from members? I don't see any. Well, it's been said before, but it's worth saying again, this is a very, very comprehensive zoning bylaw and official plan amendment. A lot of work because you have to comb almost the entire document and change several sections in order to implement it. And so it's appreciated all the work that has been done. I can report to council that at its planning and development meeting on June 16th, Bruce County Council did pass official plan amendment C22006. So we'll move on to Bruce County Council for final approval. But I think when Monica says that she feels good it's going to pass, I feel good it's going to pass too. It's passed once, so it will almost certainly pass again. So we'll see that we'll see that the county is going to be fully on board with making the changes that it needs to make. And really, and there's lots of things to debate as always when it comes to affordable housing, and lots of different things in different directions that we need to do. And this is just another one of those things, right? So we can make this change, get some or hopefully lots of additional residential units constructed across the community. We're sort of clearing the way for that. And you've heard other discussions even raised here this evening that are relevant that we'll have down the road, like the question of short-term rentals and how appropriately to regulate those. I think there's certainly a legitimate discussion to be had there. We have a long history of short-term rentals in the town of Saugeen Shores through serving the tourism sector. So I think council wants to be careful and cautious about how it regulates short-term rentals. It's a legitimate business that and there's a place for it in our community, but we also need to make sure that that we're not crowding out affordable and attainable housing, which is obviously a crisis situation that we have to address and we have been addressing. So several discussions yet to be had, and more changes to make. So we're looking forward to those. One more from the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, just one last point. Jay, I'd probably through to you, but and Cibriel, but this is just a great news story for, I think, anyways, for your laneway homes and tiny homes and additional residential units, bringing more rentals onto the market. I just think it's tremendous, fascinating news. And this has been a long time coming. Since the Untitled Housing Task Force worked 2 or 3 years ago, it's just great news for our community. And Jay, for members of the public that are wanting to do something like this, we're going to make a concerted effort here. gallant effort to get the word out that, you know, once this is approved, adopted by the county, that is, that this is real now. And if you wanted your granny flat, your laneway home, your tiny home, here's your opportunity. So they're going to put forth a really good effort to market this to the community so the word gets out.
Yes, if I may, it was important to us to make sure that the community was aware that this was something that we were looking at. So communication and a strategy to support the community to learn about secondary units, or I better get with the language, additional residential units, make them aware and understand what they can do, how they could provide the housing, how they can fit in with the community. So we created the guide, but we're also going to be promoting through our social media and our communication staff over the next few weeks to make sure people are fully aware and know how to access the information.
That's perfect. It's just such a good news story. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, very good. We're looking forward to that. Councilor Jakes?
Just a question regarding, it was mentioned accessibility. I was wondering if we could also add into the guide the phrase barrier free, which is another way of just sort of expressing that an entryway coming up, or maybe looking to visitors coming into your additional residential unit, that it would be an option for them as well, because we're looking at generations as well, maybe using these units, if we could do that maybe. Thank you.
Are there any comments? Is that something that we can look at with the guide, Jay?
Well, yes, I think I would like to make it clear to council that the guide is meant to be a living document, and it will be up to date as the bylaw changed. The version that's available or will be available tomorrow will be tweaked as needed to reflect barrier free. I also understand accessibility committee is even looking at their own guidelines for this, so we would like to be able to take from the committee and update our guide when that's ready. So.
Just an awful lot of work going on in several different ways on this file. And so anyway, thanks for that, Jake. So the recommendation that the committee adopt local official plan amendment L 2022-002 is attached, and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to county council for approval, and that the committee approve zoning bylaw amendment Z 2022-026 as attached, and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. So mover and seconder for the resolution, moved by Councilor Davinsky, seconded by Councilor Jakes. No further discussion, then all in favor. That is carried. All right, thank you very much. So, that will return now then to a future Saugeen Shores Council meeting for consideration, so the public can stay in touch with this file by following council agendas. And I guess as it turns out, this may head through a delegated process at the County of Bruce, so it likely will not return to a Bruce County Council meeting. So that brings us to the end of this public meeting, and we'll move on to our second public meeting, which is 5.2 Z 2022-020 for Steve Herzig at 478 Green Street. And we will turn it over to the planner, Barbara Mugabe, for the presentation. Ms. Mugabe.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Charbonneau. I just need a few seconds to load up the presentation. Yes, good evening, committee. This zoning amendment application is in relation to the property 478 Green Street. The site is in Port Elgin. The applicant is
Barbara.
Yes.
We're getting a bit of feedback on your mic. I wonder if is it a little close to your mouth maybe or something, or I don't know. Give that a try.
Okay. All right. So this property is at the southwest corner of Green Street and Cake Street in Port Elgin. There are two access points to the property, one off Green Street and another one off Cake Street. This is primarily a low-density residential neighborhood, and St. Joseph's is a short walking distance from the subject land. I've included a few photographs just to show the site. This is an image of taken from Green Street, showing the original two-story, three-bedroom single detached dwelling, which was built in the 1800s. This driveway accommodates 2 vehicles. This is the back portion of the property. The property abuts a road allowance at the back or the south side. What we're looking at is the side of the attached garage, and in behind is a shed. The property shows best from Cake Street. There was a single story, 1-bedroom granny flat that was added to the single detached dwelling in the early 1900s. I understand both the main dwelling and the granny flat are currently rental units. There's a 2-car garage that was added to the south side of the granny flat in around 2004. The applicant has a heating and air conditioning business which operates off the premises, but he does store his air furnaces and tools inside this garage. The loft is used as an office. Mr. Herzig is seeking to construct a 1-bedroom apartment with a loft, potentially a 2nd bedroom above the garage. This would increase the number of units within the dwelling to 3, thus converting the existing dwelling to an apartment. I just wish to draw your attention to the driveway. There are actually 3 parking spaces in front of the garage, and there's an additional parking spot on the other side of the tree, right where the red vehicle is parked. So this application, therefore, is seeking to change the residential first density zone to a residential 3rd density zone to permit an apartment dwelling. The amendment is also seeking to legitimize the use of the attached garage for storing furnaces and tools associated with the air conditioning and heating business. Relief is requested to reduce the lot frontage from 30 meters to 21.9 meters for the apartment dwelling. Relief is also requested to reduce from 1.2 meters to 1 meter the interior side yard setback for the accessory structure. That's the shed in behind the garage. There have been no objections from the departments and agencies. Town staff have are very supportive of this gentle intensification. They do have some comments and concerns which need to be addressed. The first one is they've asked that the business be recognized through this zoning process, and we have done that through the amending bylaw. We have acknowledged that there is the business component. Then the other comment is in relation to parking. They've asked that the applicant show the dimensions of the parking as well as the number of parking spaces proposed. The applicant has submitted an additional drawing that does show the dimensions of the parking. The town staff have also indicated that they will allow the existing non-compliant driveway along 8th Street to accommodate parking as required by the bylaw. This site does not have any environmental features. We did receive one set of comments. They were from Mr. Richard Ferguson at 471 Johnson Avenue. For the most part, he's just seeking clarification in terms of what the current zone and the proposed zone allow. We have responded directly to Mr. Ferguson, and just for committee, the residential first density special R13 zone does allow for singles and semis as well as a duplex. That special provision does provide for existing cottage parks, and I note that there is not a cottage park on this property. In terms of the proposed zone, that zone would allow for an apartment, multi-unit dwellings, townhouses, home-based childcare, unlicensed childcare, and home occupation. And the special provisions are really in relation to the lot frontage as well as the interior side yard for the accessory units. Mr. Ferguson had also asked about the required parking for the apartment dwelling. well, for apartments, the required parking is 1 space per dwelling unit, plus 1 space for every 4 dwelling units. So for the 3 units that are proposed, a total of 4 parking spaces is required, and that will be provided in the 2 driveways. Mr. Ferguson is also, he brought to our attention that there is the heating and air conditioning business, and he was asking if this is a legal use on the site, and also noted that there are 2 vans that get parked on the site in connection to that business. So as I mentioned, this amendment would be seeking to legalize that business. And in terms of parking, just 1 parking spot is required in connection to the business. So for a grand total of 5 parking spaces on the site, and all 5 parking spaces will be provided within the 2 driveways. Mr. Ferguson had also commented that this is mainly a single-family residential area and should remain as such and should not be spot zoned. My response is that the provincial policy statement does have strong policy for residential intensification in settlement areas. Settlement areas have adequate services and amenities and are intended to absorb growth and development. This specific site can reasonably accommodate the additional units, and both the county official plan and the local official plan does allow for medium density uses in this area. I've also looked at the policy that addresses medium density developments and also for converted homes, and this proposal does comply with those policies. So as a summary and a recap, this amendment is seeking to change the zone on the subject land from residential 1st density special to residential 3rd density special. This would allow for an apartment dwelling. The amendment is also seeking to legitimize the use of the attached garage for storing furnaces and tools associated with the landowner's heating, air conditioning and heating business. Relief is required to reduce the lot frontage from 30 meters to 21.9 meters for the apartment dwelling. Relief is also required to reduce from 1.2 meters to 1 meter the interior side yard setback for the accessory structure. At this point, I'm just seeking feedback from committee and from members of the public. The intent is to come back at a subsequent meeting with a recommendation report that would also take into account any matters that might have arisen during tonight's meeting. The recommendation, therefore, is to receive this application as information. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, well, first we'll move into the public meeting, and I'm sure there'll be some questions or comments. So we will open the public meeting now. And as usual, we will begin with comments from the applicant or their representative. And we do have Steve Herzing with us this evening. So Mr. Herzing wishes to make some comments. Now's the time. Are you there, Mr. Herzing?
Yeah, I don't really have any comments at this time.
Okay.
But I'm here to answer any questions.
That's great. Much appreciated. Thank you.
No problem. Okay.
So, Linda, are there members of the public who wish to speak to us on this application?
Mr. Mayor, we have no further speakers that are listed. I was working with somebody that on an email, but they have not joined yet. So at this time, we have no further speakers.
Well, let us know if anybody comes in before the end of the public meeting. We can accommodate them.
Thank you.
All right, so then that's on to members of the committee for questions or comments. Are there questions or comments? Start with Councilor Matt and then come to the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. Ms. Mugabe, I just have a question. At the beginning of the presentation, you said that they're going to be adding a one more residential unit to bring the total from 2 to 3. Where does the 2 come from? I see it's a single family dwelling in the house. Is there 2 apartments in the house already? And we're adding a third or proposing to add a third on top of the garage? Am I reading this correctly?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. So presently there is a granny flat that was added to the single detached dwelling, so that so in total they currently have 2 units. So this proposal is to add an additional unit above the garage for a total of 3 units within the dwelling.
Okay, that makes sense. Then I guess I missed the granny flat part. Okay, thank you.
Okay, the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just wanted clarification, Ms. McGobby, that a heating and cooling business and there's a storage included on this lot, that it is permitted. Just wanted to hear it from you again, that another unit on top of the garage, rental units, bringing it to 3 units in total, is permitted. And secondly, the fact that there's storage on site to do with the heating cooling business is also permitted, allowed. Is that correct?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. So the heating, the air conditioning and heating business, the applicant has explained that it actually occurs off the premises. It's not occurring on the site, but what he's doing is he's storing his air furnaces and tools and equipment within the garage.
Yeah, sure.
So that's currently not a permitted use. So through this planning process, we are seeking to allow for that additional use.
Sure. And I know we'll comment, this is again, no decision tonight. The recommendation is to, just want to get this right, a recommendation at a future meeting, correct, Mr. Mayor? This would be a
Yes, this
recommendation at
one
a
is-
future meeting. This one is.
Right. Sorry, yeah.
So I'll speak further, to this at a later date. And I mean, there's so much need in our community for additional rental units. I'm sure that Mr. Herzing could make good use of this for his employees. And I'll speak to that a little bit later when that comes back. But I just wanted to say that it's just a minor thing, Barbara, that on line on the summary pay on line 6 to Herzing, it's just a minor change, Barbara, but Herzig, just change that to Herzing, just for the, so on file that we've got his name right in the report. Okay. It's line 6 to the summary. Okay. Yep.
Thank you for that. Councillor Jakes and the Deputy Mayor.
A question, I'm not sure who can answer it. Regarding if there's a fire with that many units, is it 3 or 4 that the fire alarms have to be joined all as one? I'm not up on it. Does anybody know?
Barbara?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. So no, I'm not very familiar with fire safety measures. I would assume that there would be for sure fire alarms in the house. I don't know if Mr. Posner might be able to speak more to that question.
Okay.
Oh, sure, I can speak. Whether it's intelligent or not, I don't know. But the answer, I think the best answer is that he has already been in active conversation with our building department. So I'm confident that, that whatever the appropriate legal requirement is, they'll be able to communicate that to the owner.
Okay. The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Barbara, could you pull up the diagram, the picture you had showing the side of the house on Johnson Avenue?
So we don't have Johnson Avenue. We have Cake.
Sorry, Cake.
Street.
Yes,
Oh,
Cake.
all right. I'll just share my screen once again. Okay.
I think it's slide 5 there.
Is it this slide?
Yep. So, Mr. Herzing, where that truck is that the laneway or is that still on your property?
No, that's on my property.
Oh.
It's not the laneway. The laneway, there's a fence on the other, to the left.
On the other
that
side of the truck?
yeah.
Okay, so will that, that looks like a willow tree. Will that have to go for parking?
No, I want to keep it. I'd
Okay.
like to keep it.
That's good. My concern is the parking allocation. I find that one vehicle per dwelling really doesn't cut it for residential houses. I don't know many houses, if you go down any street, that has just one car in a building. So I just want to make sure that we have adequate parking, especially if one of your trucks is going to be coming in and out to pick up stuff. I think 5 or 6 spaces for the apartment, the 3 apartments, is closer to what is required. That's just my thoughts, Mr. Mayor.
I guess the question to Ms. Mugabe is, does the parking that's proposed meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw?
Yes, so through you, Mr. Mayor, so the parking requirement is 1 space per unit, plus an additional 1 space for every 4 additional units. So these residential units would require 4 parking spaces. So we do have sufficient parking for the residential use. And then for the business component, the applicant has explained that he does have 1 vehicle parked overnight on the subject land. One of the employees comes in the morning and picks up that van, and in that spot, he would park his own private vehicle. And then at the end of his shift, he will come back to the subject land and drop off the business van and pick up his own truck. So there's only really just 1 additional parking spot in connection with the business. So for a total of 5 parking spaces.
So if there are visitors or somebody happens to have 2 vehicles for one of the units, where are they going to park?
So that additional parking space would be for visitors. So each unit would have its own 1 parking spot, and then that additional requirement for 1 parking spot for every 4 units would be devoted to visitors.
Okay, I just worry, I believe it's a good use, Mr. Herzing. I just, like I said, I worry about the parking, knowing that we don't allow parking on the sides of the streets and not on that side of the road. I just worry about parking for people that are going to be in there. If there's more than 2 vehicles in one residence, there will be no extra parking, and then come November, there is no parking on the streets from certain time because of snow removal. So I just want to make sure that everything's kind of covered in that with that number of units. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sure. Do you have a comment, Mr. Herzig, you want to make?
I was just going to say that there are the 2 parking spots off the Green Street side for the main house. So really what he's looking at is there are potentially 4 parking spots off the Cake Street side, 3 right in front of the garage and then 1 to the left of the Willow. So that's why I believe there's plenty of parking for everyone.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Are there further comments from members? I have a comment to this. This business about amending the bylaw to allow storing tools and equipment for to support your business. I mean, I find it hard to believe that the zoning bylaw says that you can't keep stuff related to your business in your garage. Like, where are we really? Does the bylaw really restrict what you can store in your garage? Barbara?
Yes, no, Mr. Mayor, it does not. But at the same time, it is an additional use. The garage is taken away from providing parking for the residential use because it's being utilized for another purpose. So we do have to recognize that there's an additional use taking place in the garage, that it cannot be used for parking.
See, I just don't agree. Like, I think that the bylaw doesn't restrict what people can store in their garage. People can store whatever they want in their garage. And we shouldn't be adding amendments to the bylaw that starts to head down that path, because then every amendment, we're going to look in people's garage. We're going to be looking in their basement. What do you store in your basement? Do we have to permit that? You know, the bylaw isn't intended to regulate what gets stored in your garage. So I think that we should strike that. I would really like to see when staff comes back that part of the amendment is struck, because I don't think I can support it staying there.
But it does have an impact, Mr. Mayor, because then we have this additional requirement for parking in association with that vehicle.
But that's the case in every, I mean, people are allowed to fill their garage with stuff and park wherever they want, like park on their property, right? There's enough parking. It meets the bylaw. You know, we're not going to start regulating what's in people's garages, right? And that's what this strikes out to do. And I just don't support it. I would really like staff, when you come back, to remove it, because I think Mr. Herzig's allowed to store whatever he wants in his garage. And we shouldn't start regulating it. And I think this heads down the path of regulating it. So I guess my comment is, as you review this, I would like it to come back without it. The Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, the question I have to what you just said is it regulated because it's a business? Now, if it was just his home garage, I could see having a problem with that, but because it's a business, we have dual usage of the property. Is that what the problem is?
I would hazard to suggest that there are many people across the community storing items related to their business in their garages. It's just not an area that we ought to regulate. It's a space, you can store stuff in it. There's lots of regulations to prevent you storing hazardous things and other things unsafely. I mean, we just don't need to be down that road. Like, it's your garage, put stuff in it. That's what it's for. So I just don't think it has anything to, it's no concern of the municipalities as far as I'm concerned. And I think council will probably agree when it comes back. So my guess is we ought to remove it. But if it comes back, we'll just remove it when it gets to. Are there any other questions?
Well,
Vice Deputy Mayor?
I agree with what you're saying, Mr. Mayor. And I think if you drive around town, and I wonder how many garages actually hold cars. I imagine there are a few, but I hazard to guess that a large percentage of garages are full of stuff. I shouldn't point my finger at my son and my daughter-in-law, but it's pretty full. So anyways, I kind of chuckle because I agree with you. I think we're getting a little bit overzealous with that one. But.
If I may, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, agree.
I was just going to suggest that we can go back and look at the home occupation provisions in the bylaw to see if what that storage use is permitted within those provisions, and come back with further explanation in the subsequent report.
Yeah, certainly. I think you ought to review it. I just don't think we ought to regulate it. So you've heard my argument, and I'm sure you guys will take it away and consider it. If there's nothing, is there anything further? Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? I don't hear any. So we've heard from the committee. We've heard from the public. I guess, Linda, the first person you were working with wasn't able to come in or never did come in. Is that correct?
That is correct. There's no further speakers to this application. I do apologize to Rachel Stack, who actually was interested in speaking to the additional residential units. So we have Rachel's comments that we will circulate, and I'm confident that the planners will be able to respond to the question that was raised.
Is she still with us, or is she not with us?
She is not with us. So it is with respect to the prior application. I have her comment. If you want me to read it into the record, I can do that. If you don't wish, then we will circulate it via email.
That'll be fine. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. So that brings us to the end of this application, and maybe Barbara, would you just advise the public, if they wish to be kept informed about this application, how they can do that?
Yes, certainly. So they can email us at bcplpe@brucecounty.on.ca.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so we're to the end of that one, and we'll move on to our next public meeting, 5.3, which is 41T-2016-0344 and L 2022-006 and Z 2022-019 for Barry's Construction and Insulation for Northport Meadows at Waterloo Street between Rosner Drive and Mary Street. And we will turn it over to the planner on this file, who is Karina Smith. Ms. Smith.
Good evening. Thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. So I am presenting an application on behalf of Barry's Construction and Installation. The property is located in the north end of Port Elgin, near Waterloo Street and Devonshire Road. They are seeking a major revision to a draft plan of subdivision, a local official plan amendment, and a zoning bylaw amendment. You can see on the first slide the context of the site. So it is currently a vacant field. There are surrounding development to most of the sides, and a school and park to the south. There's also a retirement residence, which is to the east of the site. So this is the current draft approved plan. So this application was approved back in 2016. And the first phase of the development, everything west of Bruce Street, which is in the center or approximate center of the site, did receive final approval and development is underway on that phase of the project. The applicant is currently coming in for revisions to the draft plan. So they are looking to remove the extension of Waterloo Street, which is on the far east of the site and would connect to Mary Street in the area of the retirement residence and the Northport Elementary School. And they would be looking to reconfigure the block on the east end of the site as well from a multi-unit development to which was in the form of townhouses to an apartment block. So as noted, the application is looking to reconfigure the draft plan of subdivision. There is a related local official plan amendment, which is looking to increase the density permitted in the apartment block and also to remove the extension of Waterloo Street, which is identified as a collector road extension in the current Saugeen Shores official plan. The related zoning bylaw amendment proposes to rezone a portion of the site from planned development, which was in the area of the Waterloo Street extension, to residential fourth density, and there are specific provisions for both the apartment block and for some of the townhouses as well. And if approved, this would facilitate a revised mix of dwelling types on this site. So this is the proposed draft plan. So as you can see on the far east end of the site, Waterloo Street would then terminate and connect with the extension of Rosner Drive. There is the apartment dwelling block, which is shown as block 111. And then the applicant is also proposing two pedestrian connections through block 110 and block 109, which is about a mid-block extension for this phase of the proposal. So I have included a couple of photos for your consideration. So this is from Bruce Street, which is the frontage currently of the property. This is looking east towards the retirement residence at the far east end of the site. This is also taken from Bruce Street, and this is looking toward the existing single-family homes that are on the development site to the north. Now we're at the far east end of the project, and this is looking from Waterloo Street towards Bruce Street, where you can see the existing phase 1 development in the background. And this is looking from Waterloo Street towards the elementary school to the south. So this plan was included just to show conceptually what the apartment block layout would look like. So they are proposing 3 buildings. Those would be 5 stories in height with parking to the rear of the buildings. The current zoning does permit up to 6 stories in this location, but the applicant currently is conceptually showing 5-story buildings. And these are just some additional photos in the area of the proposed apartment block. So to the north is already an existing 4-story apartment building, and then the retirement residence is in the background and is 2 stories in height. And this is looking from Northport Elementary School towards the apartment block again, showing the neighboring buildings. So through our review of this application, we will look at the various policies and the zoning provisions that are in play and what's being proposed on the site. So it is currently designated in the county official plan as a primary urban community, and similarly in the Saugeen Shores official plan, it is designated residential. Those designations do permit a wide variety of residential uses. So the original plan did contemplate single family and townhouses, and the applicant is looking to continue those uses, but also add apartment uses as well. There is a very wide variety of zones on the property currently, but they are looking to rezone the planned development portion of the site, which was essentially protecting that extension of Waterloo Street to the south. They're looking to rezone that to an R4 or residential fourth density zone in line with the intended apartment use, and also to add 2 additional townhouse lots as well. And there are specific provisions associated with that, which we will discuss in further detail at a later report. But essentially on the apartment block, they are seeking to increase the maximum density from 90 units per hectare to 111 units per hectare, and to reduce the landscape open space from 30% to 19%, to reduce the minimum front yard depth from 6 meters to 4 meters, and to reduce the minimum lot area from just over 23,000 square meters to just over 19,000 square meters. The rezoning on the proposed townhouse lots would be to reduce the interior side yard setback for end unit from 3 meters to 1.2 meters. And there are no proposed changes to the single family zoning on this phase of the development. The applicant did provide supporting studies, including a planning justification report from Ron Davidson, planning consultant, transportation report from Paradigm, and a stormwater management report as well from their engineering consultant. The transportation report, specifically for the extension of Waterloo Street, did identify that there would be no significant impacts to the transportation network in the area if this extension of Waterloo Street was removed, and did provide a recommendation that active transportation be continued to be provided in this location to provide that connectivity through town. And through the proposed one of the blocks for pedestrian access, the applicant is looking to maintain that connectivity. So we did provide this circulation out to various agencies and departments from the town staff. They were very pleased to see this proposal moving forward, particularly with respect to the apartments, and they would like to engage with the proponent as soon as possible to move that forward. There was also a request that a condition be included that additional residential units be contemplated in the townhouses and the single family homes in this proposal as well, which is a request that we've received on other similar projects in Saugeen Shores. So we would be looking to carry that forward. And the town is looking to have further discussions with the applicant as it relates to parkland provision, as well as amenity, particularly amenity space for the dwellers in the apartment units. There were no comments received from Bruce County Transportation. Enbridge Gas has asked for a condition, which is a typical condition to be included for a utility provider, and Hydro One had no concerns either. Since the publishing of the report and the agenda, we did receive additional comments from Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, who had no concerns. And also the historic Saugeen Métis also identified no concerns with the application, and Eastlink as well. The final comment from an agency that we did receive after the publishing of the agenda was from the Blue Water District School Board, who have asked for conditions to be included as part of the draft plan approval, and we will review that with town staff and determine how that is carried forward. As it relates to public comments, at the time the report was published, there were no public comments on the application, but we've since received several, which I'm highlighting for you this evening. So the first is from the Iqbal residents. They've identified a concern with the removal of the extension of Waterloo Street, and particularly with the ability for students to access Northport Elementary School. So we will be providing a response back indicating that there is a proposed connection at a pedestrian level to make that connection with the school. The other comment is with respect to increased density and burden on resources, including the school in this area. And so we will speak to that in a future report. We also received comments from Brian Palmer, who had identified some concerns with the pedestrian connectivity through this area as well. While he indicated support for the removal of the vehicular connection of Waterloo Street, it was important from his perspective to maintain that connectivity for bike and pedestrian users, and was looking for something more than what the applicant has shown on the current plan. So we will share those comments with the applicant and discuss that further in the future report. We also, as of today, received comments from Kathy Joss, who lives just north of the proposal, who had expressed some concern with the apartment building and if it would be a similar height to what is existing to the north. We did respond indicating that the proposal currently is for 5 stories, but the zoning does permit up to 6 stories in this location. There was a concern expressed with maintaining some type of green space between the existing single-family homes on Normanton and the proposed development. And we have identified that the single-family homes, there's no proposed change to the draft plan in this location. And so the development would proceed, if approved, on the basis that there would be just the single family homes backing onto those that are already existing. And the final comment that we received today was from Lord Elgin Estates Development Limited, and that's the developer to the north of this project site. They just are looking for opportunity to review the transportation studies submitted by Barry's Construction in further detail, and to have their consultant look into whether that would have any implications to their development to the north. So we have shared that with the applicant, or sorry, with this member, and we will be waiting to hear back from them on this specifically, and we can bring that back in a future report as well. But overall, they had no objections, provided there are no issues with traffic. So in summary, the applicant is proposing to amend an existing draft approved plan of subdivision to add an apartment block and some additional townhouse lots as well. They're looking to reconfigure the road network, and at this point, we're bringing this forward for information purposes only and to gain some additional feedback from council and members of the public. And we'll bring back a report at a later date with a recommendation for your consideration. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you. So that then begins our public meeting on this item, and we'll begin by hearing from the applicant. And in this case, we do have the applicant, Stu Doyle, with us, and I see him there. So, Mr. Doyle.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. I think the report does a pretty good job of summarizing up what our proposal is. We've been working on this project for the better part of a year now with town staff and county planners, and gone through a few iterations. We met with the school board with town staff about 6 to 8 months ago, got some good feedback from them about kind of what they wanted to see with that road extension, or not really wanted to see that road extension, how to get the active transportation to go through, as an extension of Waterloo Street. Going back many years, the extension of Waterloo Street was always going to be difficult, if not impossible. The road geometry is, obviously not great. There's the local feeder lines there for Westario Power that went right through there. And there's 3 or 4 different owners, I can't just remember right now, through there. So in consultation with the town, we ended up hiring and getting terms of references approved from Paradigm Engineering, who's the same consultant that did your traffic impact study not long before that. So they had all the data and information to kind of push that through and be able to give us some pretty good stuff. I did talk to the representative from Lord Elgin Estates today. He was kind enough to give me a call, and I sent him the report and said, any questions, just let me know, but we're happy to work with them. And we've done that in the past with our developments being neighbors. So we're certainly looking forward to this. We did modify the plan from a higher density townhouse block back there originally planned, really because of the pressures and I think that we saw the writing on the wall that the town really needed this. And obviously council was pushing for it. And I don't know if we just finished an 80 unit apartment building, and I just started another one. So I'm kind of getting my feet wet at it and kind of enjoying the process. So it's something we threw around here and thought it'd be a great idea to do that in Saugeen Shores. So that's really how it works. And I'm here to answer any questions for sure.
Great, much appreciated. Thanks for those comments. Linda, are there any members of the public who wish to speak to us on this file?
No, we have no speakers to this file. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on then to members of the committee and ask questions or comments, and the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, I think this is a great use of the land. Again, now we're looking at another 3 apartment buildings for a total close to almost 9 apartment buildings back in that area. That's going to bring close to 1,000 people in there. And how many kids is that? I really do believe Saugeen Shores needs to have a sit down with Blue Water District School Board to reiterate the growth that we're having, that we have to have something here to help alleviate the situation we're in because the schools are already at maximum capacities. One thing with that number of people coming to this area with that development, and not just that development, does staff have a plan for any recreational space in that area? With that number of people, we do need some parks dedicated in there for the people. I don't know if that's something that we can get an answer to right now, but we do need to look at having some parkland dedicated for that.
Maybe it'd be best to put it to Jay. Do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, I think there's still a few options. This isn't, certainly when this draft approval was originally approved, there was no parkland. The approval was contingent on the developer providing cash. We did open the discussion, as you saw, with our comment that we want to look at how amenity space will be provided. Still haven't resolved that with the owner, of course, because we're not even draft approved yet. When it comes to the sort of I guess the overarching look at Parkland, there was thought put towards getting connection to the park that's being built at Summerside. It's why I think part of the reason the developer provided the connection from the roundabout directly, running north and parallel to Devonshire, and then connecting to the park further to the west. And of course, we own the land partially to the south on the west side at what is that? Bruce and Joseph, which has not been developed as a park, but it is owned by the town right now. But there hasn't been, I mean, I guess the ball diamonds are there, but it's, yet remains to be seen what the future use of that land is. So not ideal. We're confronted with this revision now. So we'll work on answers over the next few weeks before this comes back.
Thank you. But like as I said, with that number of people in that area, parks must be created, and not just children's playground space. We need high top for basketball and or tennis or something like that out there. The kids are heavy into basketball, and we do not have enough basketball courts in Saugeen Shores for them to use. Second one is to make sure that we do have the active transportation route. Devonshire has the bike lanes on it, and I want to continue as putting in a plug for the active transportation committee that we continue to have bike lanes designated on all the new roads that are being developed. And the last question is, and this goes with all of our developments, will there be a portion of the apartments dedicated to affordable housing?
Turn that over to the planner or potentially to Mr. Doyle. We'll start with the planner and then we'll go.
Yeah, so this is the exciting part of the conversation, is that working with this landowner, with Barry's Construction, he has been receptive to applying for the specific affordable housing rather than just high density. He's had, I think Stu even referred a little bit to it, experience working in Owen Sound on an affordable housing project with funding from CMHC, and we're happy that he's also considering it here. So.
Okay, I think I had Councillor Mayette next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Obviously, the plan looks really good, and I like the idea that there's it's been structured in such a way that the apartment building isn't going to be perceived to be looking over already established single-family dwellings or even townhouses. So obviously, there's been a lot of thought put into it, and so I'm looking forward to the recommendation coming through. With regards to Waterloo Street, I've had a number of people comment to me about the separated Waterloo Street. If you live on that north part of Waterloo Street and you order something from a courier, they often get messed up because you have two streets that don't connect. They just disconnect at Mary Street. I wonder if it's not related to this application necessarily, but is there any thought to maybe making a designation Waterloo Street North as opposed to the rest of Waterloo Street for an address? How we ended up with two streets in the same municipality that don't connect to one another with the same name, I'm not sure. I imagine there was intention at the beginning that those two Waterloos would eventually connect, but as Stu Doyle pointed out, there's 4 different owners of lands and infrastructure issues that is it going to make it practically impossible to connect those two together other than by a bike lane or something. And I wonder if we could just plant that seed with planning that maybe there be a, just as an example, Waterloo Street North, as opposed to the rest of Waterloo Street. That way people could just add an end to their address and make things simpler, because I have had the comment numerous times from people who have an address on Waterloo Street, and it's confusing for visitors or for couriers. So I'll just leave that with you at that. Thank you.
Sure. We have a few cases. We have a few situations like that across the municipality. So it's worth making the point. Are there other questions or comments from members? Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your presentation. And it's nice to see you again, Stu, and various construction. It's the potential to add another 264 units, I think it is, for rental units into our community. Your willingness to apply for CMHC financing, and I think that's a great thing. And make some of those below market rent, we get there someday. I know we're going to comment on this application, I guess, in a few weeks, but I commend you for that, Stu. And we've been pushing hard for rental units, and this is a good news story. I comment every time on landscape, and I don't like the 19% landscaping. And some members of council may differ with me on this one, but I remember Devonshire, that development there went from 19% to 28, 29%. The hotel unit, the south end of town, went from 18% to 28, 30%. Development Mary Rose went, I think almost committed 28, 30%. So I don't think we should really skip over too quickly the landscape being reduced from 30% to 19%. I think this community needs landscape. And if it's buffering for Kingsway Arms, Lord, Elgin Lodge, buffering around the perimeter, I think we should take, I really do think we should take a look at the 19%, Stu. We got to find ways. I think, maybe we don't hit the 30%, but I'd like to see it bumped up personally, Mr. Mayor. I think we should be always looking at ways to plant more vegetation in these areas to beautify our town. And the Parkland concerns me, Deputy Mayor. Thank you. That area, it's about 4, 5, 6 blocks to, over to the park. I'm just trying to think of them. Sorry, the Devonshire and Bruce Street. It's a beautiful park over there. I think it's an acre or two, and room for expansion. But it is a hike if you got a stroller and you're walking your young ones for any of those apartment buildings. It's a fair hike over to that park. So, Mr. Mayor, I get excited when I talk about Pioneer Park because we've got this wonderful park called Lamont Sports Park. And some of that existing space we may not be able to keep. And I'm talking about Beener, and we need to have some discussion about that in the near future. What's going on with that major ball diamond that's being replaced as soon as next year at Lamont, and that's maybe a perfect spot for that neighborhood park, community park at Beener in the future. So maybe this development doesn't have to have the parkland space. If we put all our eggs in the Beener lands pocket, basket, maybe there could be a park developed there. There really is, Deputy Mayor, I agree. There needs to be a park in that area. And whether it's a parkette, a couple swings and slides, but I just think that we're missing the boat a bit with development this size, not having parkland space inside it. But we do have Beener Park right next door. And maybe that's our answer. It's great to hear about the connecting link for the trail system. It's important. And I just think we should take, if you want high density, this council's talked about high density. This application is high density. So, but I just think, Stu, I like personally, like to see that landscaping number 19% raised up. I just think it's important for our community to beautify our community. But this is a good application, Stu, and I really appreciate what Barry's Construction are doing here, bringing over 250 units into our community for rentals, and you applying to the government, your CMHC financing for below market rent, subsidized rents. I think it's a great thing. So I'll talk about it further in a few weeks when it comes back, but those are my comments, Mr. Mayor.
Do you have any comments, Mr. Doyle, about the opportunities around landscaped open space?
Yeah, so back when we did this original draft plan, that was kind of, the town was just getting into asset management pretty hard, and everybody's starting to understand that assets cost money. So the idea was, instead of having a lot of small parks, it was, they'd ask for cash in lieu so that it could be either invested in an existing neighbor, adjacent park, or reinvested in a park that already exists. Now, obviously, we are increasing the density here, but that was certainly a discussion at the time. Why the town didn't want to take another little parkette only because they take quite a bit to maintain, and there's already existing parks around it, or obviously the vacant land at Beaner Park right next door, that at the time was probably going to be not a baseball diamond. I don't know what the plan is right now. I don't know that. I've kind of lost touch of that study over the last couple of years, but I'm not sure. And then with respect to the landscaping, we did put an item in the planning report that did mention if we went back to say the zoning bylaw allows for 1.25 parking spaces per unit. Now, we've done lots of these buildings where we've gone to 1.1, and just going to 1.2% gets us up to 23% landscape. So we can, losing 6 to 7 spots, we can knock up that landscaping area by, I think, 3 to 4%. So I have no issue looking at something like that. It's just really, I need to understand really what the town wants and respond to it with something that works for you guys.
Are there further, thanks for that. Are there further comments or questions from members? I think it's an important point raised around landscaped open space and the parkland, and it would be worth going back and having a look as you're reconsidering this at trying to meet that landscape open space requirement, and also looking at options for parkland. I mean, the Beaner fields are there, but they're also subject to, I think, a much broader strategic discussion by council, and the future of those lands, I think, can't be taken for granted at this point. So I think we need to consider trying to provide the recreational amenities for the folks in these subdivisions as they're built. So if there's an opportunity to do that, Mr. Doyle, Karina, as you're working together over the next coming weeks or months or however long this takes, then I would encourage you to do that and see what can be done. I do wonder, it's unclear, and probably because it hasn't been designed yet, but in terms of the pedestrian connection or the active transportation connection between Waterloo Street and the Waterloo Street extension, like it's unclear from what I'm seeing here exactly how that's going to look or where it's going to be. And I wonder, and I do wonder, and I'll float this, and it may be undoable or it may not make sense, but I do wonder if there is value in creating a road allowance that connects the existing Waterloo Street and the new extension of Waterloo Street that might remain unopened, but that could accommodate that active transportation route, so that the municipality in future would have the potential or opportunity to connect the roads. But we may not choose to do that now because it isn't practical. But I do wonder I just wonder at the wisdom of constructing these roads and leaving no opportunity in the future to connect them. And so I do wonder if those two things, I guess, is it possible to get some better sense? Maybe I'm just not reading the maps well, but I don't see that. I don't really understand where the active transportation route is. And also, is it possible to consider a road allowance that would connect those two roads as part of this design of this subdivision? Jay, you have comments? Yes, Stu.
I mean, obviously, if you're talking about road allowance, you're looking at a 20-meter right of way. Sorry, Jay, were you going to?
No, you go ahead.
No, it just took 10 sequence for the camera to come on.
Go
ahead.
Jay.
So something like that, we'd have to obviously adjust this quite significantly. There is a 7-meter hydro easement along the southern lot line there that exists that, obviously we can't do anything with it. So, and I don't know if Western Power would permit a pedestrian trail through there, but it's certainly an option because we can't build with that anyway. The setback there is 9 meters for the 5-story building. I could certainly talk to Western Power to see if they permit, if we put a block. I don't know. I'm sure we could easily give it to you guys as part of the subdivision process, but I'm just not sure it'd be allowed with their easement.
Did you have a comment?
No, I guess it was more to emphasize that I think it's too much to answer in this meeting. So my answer was going to be provide as detailed as a response over the number of issues I've identified in Karina's next report. I do want to emphasize that I also agree with the mayor about a larger strategic discussion related to Beaner Park. And part of it had to do with the complications related to the school board, their needs, if the connection were to go through. A myriad of puzzle, essentially a 1,000-piece puzzle has to, somehow function. And it's just obviously for tonight, maybe even the next meeting, just something that it will be hard to articulate over the next little while.
And I only raised those questions so that you will consider them when you go away and think about these things. I don't expect you to give me answers on these things tonight, but I would like to consider particularly, I would like a good answer back from staff on the strategic interest of the municipality, particularly in the connection between the two sections of Waterloo Street. And if the subdivision is to go ahead without a connection, just a good justification for why that's in the long-term interest of the municipality. It just concerns me a little. And also the design of the active transportation route, I'd like to see that in this. So those things. And one more, I'm going to come to Councillor Jakes, but I'll just finish my comments since I'm making them. The deputy mayor spoke about the schools. And we do have this letter here from Blue Water District School Board. Council's made itself clear on this letter before. I anticipate, though I can't speak for all of council, I can speak for myself, so I will. I certainly won't support including those things in a future, as conditions of a future draft plan. And council has done that before. So hopefully, I would ask you, Karina, to sort of highlight. I'm not certain you have the flexibility not to bring it forward, but when it does come forward, I'd appreciate if you highlighted it so council could make an individual decision on those points before they went in. And also I will note, and the deputy mayor rightly points out the need for schools, particularly this large development. I had my very first meeting with our newly elected MPP, and about 80% of that discussion was about schools and the need to construct schools. So we are reinitiating the full court press on that issue, because this development as proposed, and we have approved since the beginning of the year. If you include this development, it's over 700 new rental apartment units that has come across our table here, and that's an awful lot of people and potentially an awful lot of kids who are going to need schools. And so anything short of giving them a school is not going to be an acceptable answer from our standpoint, and we're working on that. So, Councillor Jakes.
So you did answer my question that I had about active transportation. So I don't have to go through that, and also about Waterloo Street. So you did do that. Thank you, Mayor.
I read your mind.
Don't read anything else.
Okay. Are there other questions or comments? The Vice Deputy Mayor.
I just want to mention, Mr. Hydro One, and I researched this many years ago, just top of my head, but Stu, just keep in mind, Hydro One have a really good program, use of hydro corridors for pedestrian trail use, and so you might want to research that a little bit, for connecting trail linkage, and you talked about that corridor to the south end of your property. Perhaps Westero Power can look into that and take a look at what Hydro One does in terms of benchmarking and how they make good use of their properties for pedestrian trail systems. So something you might want to take a look at, Stu, if you're thinking, you raised the question about that corridor. Could be a good connecting link for a trail system.
Yeah, and through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the traffic impact study too that we did complete does go over, I think, point by point why a connection here doesn't really work. So we would try to complete that ahead of time to actually even evaluate if we should bring this to the town. And that was really the reason we brought it this far along without the connection, is because we had that backed up, kind of working with town staff to make sure we were hitting the points that needed to be captured. But anyway, we're happy to talk about in the future with the staff, no problem.
Okay. Is there anything else from any members before we conclude this public meeting? I don't see anything, so thank you very much, Mr. Doyle and Karina. We will conclude this public meeting. And Karina, could you just remind the members of the public how to get more information on this file as it makes its way through the process?
Yes, anyone who would like to receive notification on this file can reach out to County Planning Department. You can reach us by phone or email at bcplpe@brucecounty.on.ca.
Great, thank you very much. All right, so that brings us to the end of our public meetings, and we're now on to 6.2 reports. There's 2 reports on this evening's agenda, and the first one is 6.2.1 Z-2021-086 Alexander Fraser and Michelle Pachuk for 530 Izzard Road. Pardon me. We'll turn it over to our planner, Barbara Mugabe. Ms. Mugabe.
Yes, sir. Thank you once again, Mayor Charbonneau. I'll share my screen. So this zoning bylaw amendment application was before committee just last month for the statutory public meeting. During that meeting, committee did not express any concerns, and we did not receive any comments from members of the public. This the zoning bylaw amendment application is in relation to 530 EZ Road in Port Elgin. This site abuts an open road allowance to the west, and beyond that is the lake. The property contains a cottage and a shed. The front area of the property is zoned residential first density R1, but most of the property is environmental protection. The landowner is proposing a 4-season replacement dwelling in the environmental protection zone, and that zone permits existing buildings and structures, but no new buildings or structures are permitted unless they are for flood control purposes and or are in accordance with the regulations of the Conservation Authority. The proposed development is supported by a dynamic beach study or coastal study, which was undertaken as requested by the Conservation Authority to determine the limit of the shoreline hazard and to advise if there will be an acceptable risk to public safety and to property. The report indicates that the shoreline appears to be mostly stable. The dynamic beach processes are generally not occurring landward of the existing tree line. The new dwelling will be located outside the flooding hazard. The coastal engineer had recommended moving the structure 4.5 meters inland to be outside of the erosion hazard of the dynamic beach. The applicant did submit a revised site plan based on that recommendation. As such, both the coastal engineer and the Conservation Authority are satisfied with the current location of the replacement structure. The structure will not be located lakeward of the existing development. Therefore, the risk of coastal hazards will not be greater than that of the existing development. So this application is really to amend the environmental protection zone by adding provisions to permit a replacement dwelling. Relief is also requested to reduce the rear yard setback from 7.5 meters to 2 meters. There are no changes proposed to the front portion of the property, which is zoned residential first density. There were no objections from the departments and agencies. Town staff had commented that encroachments into the road allowance should be removed to the town's satisfaction, and this was in reference to the existing patio. The Conservation Authority has indicated that based on the site-specific dynamic beach assessment, the reconstruction will have a negligible impact on the dynamic beach and should not interfere with the natural coastal processes. They've also indicated that although the proposed development is within significant wildlife habitat and also within the adjacent lands to fish habitat, there is existing development of similar size and impact. The impacts to fish habitat will be negligible, provided proper erosion and sediment control measures are implemented during the construction to prevent the migration of sediment off-site into the lake. As a summary then, this application is seeking to amend the zoning bylaw to permit a replacement dwelling within the environmental protection zone. Relief is required to reduce the rear yard setback from 7.5 meters to 2 meters. This application is supported by a coastal assessment study. This proposal is consistent with the provincial policy statement conforms to the county official plan and the local official plan. Planning staff is supportive of this application and is recommending approval. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Ms. McGovey. There is a recommendation that council approves zoning bylaw amendment Z 2021-086 as attached for the property described as Plan 324, Lot 4, Izard Avenue West, Saugeen, and that the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. Is there a mover and seconder for that? Moved by the Deputy Mayor, second by Councilor Mayette. Is there discussion? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe our applicants have gone above and beyond to meet the requirements that were asked of them to redevelop their property. There was already a house there. I don't see it being really a wildlife habitat to be worried about. So with what they've done, they've made the proper changes. I'll be supporting this wholeheartedly.
Yep, thank you, Councilor Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And similarly, I think all of the agencies involved that have been looking at this have done their due diligence and to come up with a reasonable solution, even with the slight encroachment that's being proposed. I think this is going to be a great opportunity for the landowners, and it's been well handled by all the agencies involved. So for that reason, I will be supporting it as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Further comments? We'll see any. You've heard the recommendation. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, thank you. So now we're on to our second and final report, which is a staff report on affordable housing community planning permit system review, preliminary research and directions, presentation by Sean Hertel and Associates. And we'll start with Supervisor Development Services, and he'll take it from there.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This has been I guess I won't say a long time coming, although it's been a relatively recent introduction that I've had to Sean and his team. But I want to, lead the introduction here, if I may, that with the support of the Municipal Modernization Grant, the town did retain Sean Hertel and Associates to help us review community planning permit systems with a sort of a bent towards affordable housing. Sean's here this evening to inform council about what a CPPS is, outline preliminary findings, and actually how unique this review is, advise members about how we're going to engage stakeholders in the community over the next few months, some additional opportunities for further research, and then the next steps in the review and eventual potential outcome of the CPPS. So I'll turn it over, if I may, to Sean now. He'll, over the next few minutes, go through his presentation.
Thanks very much, Jay. Please just bear with me as I try to share my screen. I trust that you can see the presentation.
Yep, we have it. Great,
thank you. So thank you very much, Jay, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, and members of council and staff and everyone out on YouTube listening. Thank you. It's really I got to say it's a pleasure to have this project, to have this opportunity to work with the town. I really do. Many people have said this already, but I think it's worth repeating that staff are great. I'm really enjoying working with Jay and Sibriel in particular, and you're very lucky to have such a good staff, and it's great to work with them. And this is a really interesting project. I might be going off script a little bit, but no surprise to those who know me. But Saugeen Shores is really being innovative here by embracing new tools or any opportunity to identify and advance affordable housing. And the CPPS, us planners love our acronyms and short form, so we got to work on that one. But a community planning permit system is the first of its kind in Ontario. It's the first move by municipality to look at a CPPS for the explicit purpose of addressing the supply and the type of housing that's attainable to people in Saugeen Shores. So right off the top, no one's doing this. And so it's great to have the opportunity to work with staff, to work with the town, to see what we can come up with. And it's clear by sitting through the last a couple hours of council that affordable housing is one of the #1 topics. And it's good to see people being enthusiastic about proposals coming forward. So this is fertile ground, and I'm really appreciative to have the opportunity to work with you. So as Jay said, this is kind of a sneak peek, kind of an over the shoulder view of our work to date. We started in earnest at the end of March, early April. We're doing some investigations. We have a kind of an idea of where we've been and where we might want to go. And we wanted to update council on what's going on. So what I tell my students and anybody who will listen is, never be the smartest person in the room. And, that's never a problem for me. So I've come in with a great team. I am lucky to head a firm that does really good and meaningful work with great people. And my associate, Annika Huey, who's out there in YouTube land, is indispensable to us for making us all look good. She's a planner. My former colleague from Toronto Metropolitan University, now formerly Ryerson University, Dr. Stephen Weber, market analyst, market specialist, and an urban planner from Urban Formation, is leading our economic analysis and housing statistics research and recommendations and pro forma and other things on this project. And a lot of a common thread is through what I've sat through already is, what does the public say? How have they been informed? We've heard this, we want to check back in with them about that. And so public consultation is important, recognizing that a lot of work has already been done through the Attainable Housing Task Force. And continuing that work and building on that work is a great firm, a great energetic firm called Process, led by Nadia Galati and her colleagues Casey Hinton and Trina Moyen-Bell. Trina is Indigenous, and she is leading the Indigenous consultation. So it's important that we have a consulting team that actually, looks and can connect with the community. So I'm very grateful to the team that has joined me on this really interesting project. And thanks again to Jay and Sibriel for making this fun and meaningful. I'm just having a little difficulty with my slides for some reason. I apologize. Doesn't seem to want to flip. Okay, so I'm going to skip over this because we're going to be informal. So let's just tell you what's going on. So as Jay said, through a grant that we have, we're looking at how a CPPS, a community planning permit system, and I hope you can permit me to say CPPS, to address what is not just a big city problem, right? We all know that we're all dealing with the affordable housing crisis. And actually, I would say that smaller municipalities like Saugeen Shores would actually feel its effects even more than in big cities. Because of the supply is generally not as, there's not as much carrying capacity to buffer shocks and changes. And so you feel it. And you're more likely to know someone that is struggling to have attainable housing. It's personal. It matters. It's our neighbors, it's our employees, it's our employers, right? So part of what we're doing is really trying to see beyond the actual housing, which of course we need more of, but to see housing for the people that it will serve. And that's really a big part of our work and our values, is to go beyond the physical building of the home to see the people, those who are here, those who may want to be here but can't be here, and employees who may not be able to stay and take advantage of employment opportunities because they just can't afford to live here, or maybe a commute from a neighboring municipality isn't viable. And that's what we're hearing already from some employers. So you're probably wondering what a CPPS is, and it's a fair question. So it's a relatively established planning tool under the Planning Act that essentially bundles all of the planning application processes, that many of which we've already talked about today: official plan, zoning, site plan, plan of subdivision, those types of approvals, bundles them all together in advance to prepare and pre-plan and essentially pre-approve a certain area of a town or a complete area of a town, to say that all you have to do is if you conform with these preloaded requirements for height, density, use, parks, etc., then you just meet a checklist, submit your application, and you're guaranteed quick, streamlined approvals within 45 days. So that sounds great, but there's a lot of front-ended work that needs to be done. And just a preview of what we've already heard from, a very small sample size of participants is that, there are many impediments, many stressors for attainable and affordable housing. But generally, the town's planning and approvals process is not really one of them. And I'm certainly not pandering, it's the truth. They said, look, sure, can we optimize the system? Can we speed it up a little bit? Sure, but it's really not on our top 10 problems, right? So I just want to caution right off the top that manage expectations that a CPPS is certainly a tool available to the town to address affordable housing, but not necessarily, the tool or the only way to go about it. And that's why we're doing a lot of research to make sure that we calibrate any tool or basket of tools to suit the needs and opportunities that are unique to Saugeen Shores. So our approach is really to build on the work of the Attainable Housing Task Force, to continue to be thoughtful about the existing employees, residents, businesses, and housing stock, to see how we can, through a CPPS, increase the supply and range and mix of housing that could be more attainable to more people. But we do think, even at this early stage, that we're going to have to be fairly specialized in how we apply the tool. Because we've already talked tonight, in the limited items that we've talked about, is the different types, situations. Some needs are different in one part of the town versus another. So we have to be equally as thoughtful and responsive, and coming up with the right approach to best fitting a tool or a basket of tools to suit our approach. So we are looking at examining and testing many different scenarios for how this may apply. So as I said, Saugeen Shores is really out in front. While a CPPS has, in theory, been around for about 20 years now in Ontario under the Planning Act, very few municipalities have picked it up in a 20-year period. And in fact, only 7 municipalities have really given it any type of go. And the city of Toronto, picked it up and said, I don't know, maybe not now, and they put it down. So there's really 6 municipalities really actively pursuing a CPPS. But it's important to note that none of them are looking at or applying CPPS for the express purpose of attainable and affordable housing. This is the first. So right off the top, we have to be honest with ourselves, is to say, well, is there a reason for that? Is it the best tool? Or maybe they just didn't think of it, right? So that's one of the things that we're looking at, recognizing that there's different levels of tolerance and Goldilocks conditions and other things. So we're trying to be very deliberate and thoughtful about this. But once we do come up with what a CPPS could and should do and where it should do it within a town, we could really potentially make some headway, if not in entire areas, but maybe specific neighborhoods or certain conditions or streets or blocks within the town, to pre-package areas to say, look, 45-day runway from start to finish for approval, perhaps for certain types of homes or densities of homes or certain homes that deliver certain affordability measures, or a host of different things. We've already talked about apartments, parking, We've talked about parklands, schools, community services, and previous applications just today, right? So we have, as a consulting team, we're saying, okay, is there something that we can do to load into a CPPS that can deliver housing and other important community needs and assets that'll help Saugeen Shores? The truth is, at this point, we don't know for sure, and that's why we're doing a lot of research. Covered that. Sorry if I'm jumping a little bit around here, but I do want to say that while a CPPS or any type of sort of prepackaged approval permit system is fairly new in Ontario, or just not, doesn't have a lot of uptake, it's certainly quite common in Western Canada. And in particular in Alberta, they are the only jurisdiction in Canada that we found, at least in the West, that's using a CPPS or a version thereof specifically for affordable housing. And it's mostly in tourist areas, seasonal resort areas, much like Saugeen Shores. For example, Canmore, Alberta, is doing it not so much through a regulatory framework, but really to set the stage for partnerships, financial, land, otherwise, with key employers in the town, it's very industry and business specific. But we do think that there are lessons that we can take from that experience and apply here, because we have a very discrete seasonal employment base, and we also have Bruce Power, which is a major, although not physically located in the town, it's a major regional employer. And so that is another, maybe that's a place where we can learn from some of the, from the precedents out west. So I think that there could be clues and cues to follow there. So research, you don't need to be reminded of this, but your municipality certainly better than we do. But what I will say, there are a few little things that we found in our research from our housing market and development update perspective that I think are worth noting. And very quickly, sure, Saugeen Shores is growing quickly, but did you know that it's 2 and 3 times the pace of the province? I was surprised by that. I knew it was quick, but it's really lapping the province 2 and 3 times, and it's just accelerating. That's really noteworthy. And another thing that of noteworthiness, and Stephen Weber is out there in YouTube land too, and he really wanted to make sure that I express this, and I'll do my best to honor his intelligence, because he's way smarter than I am. But he said, look, Sean, tell him that Saugeen Shores has a whole bunch of children and younger adults at a ratio far higher than Ontario. And not only that, but it keeps growing year over year over year, while generally Ontario as a whole is getting older, right? Saugeen Shores is trending in a younger direction. So that's good news and bad news, right? People are coming to Saugeen Shores, that's great. But will there be enough housing stock to filter down and to sustain these age cohorts and people that are maybe younger in the town that want to stay in the town, and new families that want to keep coming to Saugeen Shores of various backgrounds and want to make a life here, right? So it's a good problem to have, but it's a challenge. It'll pose a challenge to us. Another thing is, notwithstanding Stuart's pretty excellent application for those hundreds of rental units, this still is very much a single detached community. Over the past 10 years, the mix has been quite not bad, actually, considering Saugeen Shores' size. It has a good mix, generally a 60-40 mix of detached homes and multiple units, including townhomes and apartments and row units. However, over the past year, pretty much since the pandemic, we've been pretty much almost 100% in the single detached home column. Now, whether or not that's just sort of a COVID blip or a sign of things to come, we're not sure. but it certainly could frustrate longer term affordability for more people. So that's something that we're looking at. But to staff's credit and the support of council, advocating and supporting for additional residential units does sort of soften the blow of that housing mix. It does create deeper housing opportunity and intrinsic affordability in the single detached home sector, but certainly not on its own, but it needs to be a package of other actions. The rents, market rents, again, no surprise, have increased almost doubled in a 10-year period, and they continue to increase. So any funding through the CMHC or other agencies to promote below market rent is critical, but that's not going to solve all of the problems, right? Just in the same way that a CPPS likely cannot solve everything, but the basket approach definitely is required. The last major thing that Stephen wanted me to share with you is that there is an apparent and growing gap between the incomes of those who own homes and the incomes of those who rent. And that income gap is widening. And one of the collateral impacts of that gap is that renters tend to outspend homeowners on the cost of housing by a factor of 4 to 1. And 4 times as many renters are spending more than what the CMHC would consider to be an affordable amount of money to pay for housing, which is 30% of pre-tax income. And so this is a kind of this is an alert that's certainly flashing on our radar screen, so to speak, heading into the CPPS work. Just wrapping up, we want to acknowledge in terms of public engagement that the town has already done a whole bunch of work through the Attainable Task Force, the ARU work, and other initiatives at engaging the community. And we can sympathize and empathize that there could be some consultation fatigue on behalf of the public and you as counselors and staff. So what we want to do is we want to take a smart and targeted approach to this. Is one thing that we can do is say, well, we know that we need to hear from a certain segment of the population and those who are part of civic society in Saugeen Shores. So home builders, landowners, employers, realtors, and try to make those who are usually invisible visible. Those are that means seeking out maybe people who may have been already displaced from Saugeen Shores. They might live in Mono or Urban or Owen Sound or further afield. And maybe they want to come back to the town. Or maybe like me, they vacationed as a kid in Port Elgin and like, man, retirement would be fantastic in Saugeen Shores if I could afford it, right? So to try to tap into those people. So to make the visible, invisible, visible. So we will have through process a series of one-on-one little focus groups, workshops, one-on-one conversations. We're talking to builders and landowners as well as through the town's website. Let me just pull it up here. Going a little bit ahead here. saugeenshores.ca/CPPS. We do have a page, thanks to Cibriel, where we explain what a CPPS is, what the study is about, what we hope to achieve, the things that we're looking at, and how to get involved. So when we have more specific dates for public meetings and engagement, we'll post them there. But we do have a survey that was just launched last week, and I think we've already had about a dozen or so takers in that survey. Where, as I said before, this is not just about brick and mortar buildings, it's about people. So we're asking questions about, okay, who are you? Where do you live? What are your needs? What are your aspirations. How can we, through an affordable housing strategy and CPBS, how can we perhaps acknowledge and advance those needs? And as part of that, what we'll be doing is, as I said, not just looking specifically or exclusively at a CPBS, but we're also going to be looking at perhaps other ways that we can complement a CPBS. And as part of that, we're looking at the needs of young people, young families, I think existing and potential workers, employment retention, and again, who's not here, who may be displaced or potentially displaced from Saugeen Shores, and to look at, especially through talking to realtors and housing providers, is what are some of the very specific barriers? And tell us your experiences. What's really causing the price and cost of housing to become so unattainable, not just on the demand side, but on the supply side as well. Notwithstanding that process has not so far been noted as a major concern or barrier, certainly, there's always room to improve. So that's certainly something that we will be looking at. But we don't want to, overpromise. But certainly we'll be looking at ways to streamline the process, which is fairly streamlined already. So I did go a little bit, longer than I'd hoped, but I love to talk. I love interesting projects, and I really like, quote unquote, being here, and happy to hear what you have to say, to answer any questions.
Well, that's great, John. We much appreciate it. It was a very informative presentation. I'm sure there'll be questions and comments from members, so we'll go to those now. Questions or comments from members. We'll start with Councilor Mayette and come to Councilor Jakes and then the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Thanks very much for the presentation, Sean.
You're welcome.
The statistic that you quoted about the percent that people are spending on houses, that is quite alarming, and that we have people that are spending 30 or 40 or more % on their housing. Now, when that is calculated, is that based on just the basic cost of a housing unit, like the rent per annual income, or does that include things like property taxes, water bill, any other costs that go into the basic housing unit?
Yeah, Councilor, that's a good question. Depending on sort of the time of day, there are two different answers. And Jay, and Sibriel, if you have any insights, please let me know. But a lot of people who are asked that question will say, no, it's just the actual, mortgage or rent amount. But those more purists will say, no, it includes everything, taxes and utilities and condominium fees, etc., which then would catapult, in our view, catapult that 30% even further askew. Mm-hmm. So I think it's safe to assume that it would technically, Councillor, include utilities and other non-payment things, but it would probably be even worse than the figures would indicate.
Yeah, because if you're a property owner, then you've got some obviously statutory costs associated with owning that a renter wouldn't necessarily have. So it wouldn't necessarily be an even playing field between a renting calculation and a owning calculation. But yeah, suffice to say, the gap is getting wider in our community, and that's a worrying trend. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Jakes.
I guess my question is regarding the package that you're going to present.
Hope you're still muted there, Minnie. You're sorry. You're still
again. I guess my question would be presenting the package to the planner. Part of that package, would you be able to actually define what affordable housing is, what the municipality defines as affordable housing, which goes back to Councillor Mayette's question, where it would be, is it a rent geared to income, or is it a housing hardship concept that we're looking at, and that it's defined so each developer coming in knows exactly what we're defining? We've had other developers here who, when we asked about affordable housing, they did not say rent geared to income. They said it would be maybe below market price, and gave no definition as to what that affordable housing would be. So would that be something that you could add into the package?
Yeah, Counselor, my first answer, my quickest answer would be, I think that might be something that we might think about, but it really is sort of out of scope of the study, because I think we're focusing more on what affordable housing, to just make affordable housing more affordable in the town without saying that there may be a specific metric or a specific tenure or a specific bar under which we want to achieve. Although that's something that we can consider when we're thinking about how to use and develop the CPPS tool. But I think I will caution against putting too fine a parameter around it, because we might not be able to do it. Sorry if that's not the answer that you wanted to hear, but it's certainly something that we'll take back. And I'm meeting with senior management tomorrow, and I'm sure that that's something that we're going to discuss.
Can I just follow up on that one? I just wonder, isn't it possible, like, I mean, CPPS gives an opportunity for council to create some parameters and to establish trade-offs, right? To say, in return for, if you want to build closer to a lot line, or if you want to build higher, or if you want to build greater density than might be permitted, then you can do that if you achieve some other targets, right? That you could, and that council, and that you could paint that picture as part of the CPPS ahead of time, and it would be public and approved by council, and then an applicant could say, well, look, I want to build a bigger property. Let's just say I want to build it an extra story tall, just for example, and I'm also going to make it affordable to meet this parameter that you have created. So just back to Councillor Jakes' question, like wouldn't it be really pertinent to the CPPS if we were to say, here is the definition of affordability, and it's in here, and if you meet it, developer, then you can have these other accommodations if you need them.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, that's an excellent point, and Councillor Previous as well. But I do caution, because a lot making that trade-off could actually create costs to the developer that would have to be ultimately passed on to the end user, whether it's a renter or a purchaser, without maybe some public skin in the game in terms of land, deferment of charges or waiving of charges or grants or whatever it may be. So I don't want to overpromise in that regard. But I think that's one of the reasons why the City of Toronto dropped it, to be honest with you, because what it does is it's essentially just squeezing a balloon. So it's saying, well, we're gonna move costs from this pocket to the other pocket, but they still need to be paid at the end of the day. So I don't want to overpromise, but maybe that's why no one's done it.
Yeah, okay.
That's certainly something we're looking at.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Jakes, I agree with you. And I mean, this is a community planning permit system. We're looking at affordability and attainability. And I chaired the Attainable Housing Task Force. We spent a considerable amount of time talking to the town of Huntsville, Whistler, BC, Collingwood, and we had definitions for attainable housing and affordable housing. This is a study relating to affordability and attainability. Why would we not put definitions in? Kind of boggles my mind a little bit, Sean. I think that's what this study is about. I think we need to have definitions in there. Just consider that. I think it's a good thing we should be doing. I really like the 45. I get excited when I hear about the 45-day approval process, Sean. I think that's commendable. I was intrigued by that 25 to 44 years of age that grew 29.4, almost 30% over 5 years. That growth rate's incredible. I circled, I made notes of that. Saugeen Shores is out in front. Not a lot of communities are doing this, and we are doing it. And we are serious about affordability, affordable housing, and attainable housing. And so another comment I wrote down: no one is doing this. So I think it's really good that we've this funding we've received to do this this study, and I had enjoyed meeting with your staff when I was interviewed, and I think that there's a lot of good potential here, and looking forward to see what the community's got to say about it. The last comment I wanted to make was this, and I don't know whether you've covered this off in your interviews or consultation process, but Habitat for Humanity, this, our Attainable Housing Task Force talked about a high density Habitat for Humanity build. Wouldn't it be great to build 40 Habitat for Humanity homes, a high density development? I know Habitat for Humanity Grey Bruce are very, very interested in doing something like that. Their board has met and talked about it. They like to see it happen, but they need land. They need land. And, so wouldn't it be great to see 40 young families get into a brand new home for $300,000? 325 instead of the average household price here today of $750. Young couple can't get started at $750,000. A lot of young couples. So, but anyways, I just, my question to you, I guess, if you reached out to Habitat for Humanity, and this is a permitting system, and in my view, they should be lumped into that same basket of goods, because there's great potential. Talking about affordability, attainability, Habitat for Humanity can do that. So I hope you give me some consideration in your report to Habitat for Humanity. And
Short answer is yes. We're just starting we're just getting some momentum on our consultation interview process, and they'll certainly be on the list.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, very good. Are there further comments from members? Well, so I've looked at community planning permit systems in the Planning Act for several years now. Jay and I were talking to Jay about it probably almost 10 years ago, about the concept, because I really like the idea of bundling the official plan, zoning bylaw, site plan, minor variances, and to streamline. You talk about how the people you've interviewed have said that our process is very efficient already. You're right. And I've heard that from developers several times. And it really is an outstanding system that's been developed by our staff here. But to be able to do all that, to come down at 45 days, I think would make those folks even happier. And I think any way that you can streamline the process and make it easier, even broadly, you talk about a targeted process, but even if it could be done broadly, would have the effect of making all development easier, including affordable and attainable housing. And we can, as you say, there's a basket of approaches necessary to tackle this issue. No one process will resolve it. And I wonder if we should think about it in the context of speeding up and making our process more efficient our entire process more efficient as one tool in the process of making affordable, attainable housing and all housing easier to build. And I think we can count on the fact that this council will continue to put pressure on all developers to build affordable and attainable housing. And we're advocating now for inclusionary zoning to be made available as a tool for us. You've seen the work on additional dwelling units, as you mentioned. We're striking off in several directions all at once. So I'm not sure, I guess what I would say is don't try to approach the CPPS as a comprehensive answer. Approach it as a very specific thing with a targeted goal. And the targeted goal is to speed up planning approvals. And that allows us then to market ourselves as a place where you can get things built more quickly. And that's just one more quiver in on our bow to go to developers who might build us that density and say, come to Saugeen Shores and build it, because you can get it done. You can get an approval in 45 days. And not to mention, the other benefit of the CPPS is the understanding that developer will have up front of how the process will go, right? You don't have to guess how a planning committee meeting will go, or how staff might respond to this suggestion or that suggestion. It'll be laid out. You'll know what you can do and how you can get the development you need to do, and what trade-offs you can make, and how that will be received, right? So that certainty will provide confidence, and all of those things will help us get affordable and attainable housing built. So that's how I look at it anyway. And I hope well, we wish you great success, and I'm sure that you're going to have a good consultation with the community and hear lots of great input. And I do hope that we make some progress on it. I think it's a great concept, and I think we could do great things with it. So we appreciate your work on it. And of course, Jay and Sabrielle and our entire staff's work on it, because it is creative and inventive, and we should be leaving no stone unturned and doing everything we can on this issue. And certainly I know all of council supports that and is eager to see this advance. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of our agenda, I believe. Yeah, it does. Oh no, sorry, there's a bylaw. My apologies. So yeah, we're on to bylaws, and the bylaw 54/2022 rezoning for Fraser. And it is that bylaw 54/2022 being a bylaw to amend zoning bylaw number 75/2006, being the comprehensive zoning bylaw for the town of Saugeen Shores by Alexander Fraser and Michelle Pochuk for lands located at 530 Izzard Road, is hereby read a first, second, and third time and finally passed and sealed this 20th day of June 2022. And I just have to grab the resolution. Mover and seconder. Moved by the deputy mayor, seconded by Councillor Smith. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. Okay, now that moves us on to adjournment, and I have a resolution that this planning committee meeting of June 20, 2022 hereby adjourns at 9:10 p.m. as remover and seconder, Matheson and Mayette. All in favor? Council stands adjourned. Have a good evening, everyone.